All right, we'll go ahead and get started. And so this session is on social studies. And I'll just jump right in and give you a quick overview of the social studies test. I'm going to take the approach that you may be new to teaching social studies, new to teaching period, that kind of thing. I just want to make sure that you have all of the information. So the test is 70 minutes. The content is 50% civics and government, 20% United States history, and then 15 economics, 15 geography and world history. So it has themes of developing or the development of modern liberties and democracy, dynamic responses in societal systems, and social studies practices of analyzing, thinking, reasoning, and technology enhanced question items. And so again, just another way of looking at that is the 70% of the test is civics and government and US history. So of course that needs to be your emphasis when you go to teaching this information. There the technology enhanced items, you've got multiple choice, you've got fill in the blank, but the technology piece is drag and drops where you would have boxes with answers and blanks, and then you drag and drop them into the respective boxes. Hotspot means that you're placing a dot on a graph or a line, a timeline, things like that, that you're actually clicking on something. And then a drop down, of course, would be you're clicking and you have some choices that drop down. The extended response is only in the language arts. So I wanted to quickly let you know that there is an assessment guide. It's like 240 pages or something like that, but it is also broken down to subject by subject, which are about 40 to 60 pages. Please do yourself a favor and pull that down and have that available. I always downloaded it in the 4 segments so that I could just look at whichever segment I wanted to look at versus trying to scroll through the whole big document. So that is the link. I will send this out in PDF form to Danielle and she can distribute this to you. And these would be clickable links then that would take you straight into those resources. We're going to deviate just a second for this first part of this, because close reading is one of the most essential skills for passing the social studies test. So I'm not going to talk about the social studies content as much at the very beginning of this presentation, because if they don't have the close reading skills, they're not going to be able to pass the social studies test. So we really have to dig into that reading piece. So we're going to do that with some close reading strategies. Prepare your students to read. So what I mean by that is help them to think about what they're going to be reading and ask themselves questions about, what do I think I'm going to get out of this? What do I think it's going to be about? Things like that. Seek to understand the author's purpose. This is going to be very important in the social studies realm. And you'll see it here at the second half of this, how this all comes together in those specific social studies performance level descriptors. And ask questions. It helps to maintain focus. Reread the text. And so often our students barely skim something, and then they don't understand why they get a question wrong. And so you've got to teach them to read and reread the whole text. So what I always did was had students read the whole text just at that surface level, not really digging into it, just getting the picture of the whole text, and then go in and reread it and start dissecting that down and getting the parts and pieces of that. Help them to not rush. Quite often what the assessment team has said is that they feel like students are going too fast through this test. And so they're not reading closely. and then they're getting the answers wrong. And you'll see that again in the second half of this presentation, where those gaps are and how this affects that. So teach them to take their time to read it, because they are likely to get the answer wrong if they don't. So it's not doing them any good to rush through it. We have to also teach stamina with reading, how to help them stick with what they're reading. So you can build that stamina by using one paragraph articles, things like that, and then moving up to multi-level paragraphs, things in harder reading levels. Teach them to use the highlighter tool, please. This is one of the most underutilized tools within the test environment, and it's so important, especially on the social studies test. They need to mark key parts of the text as they're reading it, and it's going to help them. It's going to break it down and have it be less daunting when they're going to answer those questions. Another thing that people don't think about when you're reading is to take notes. So if they're not comfortable using the highlighter tool, they may jot down something. That does take longer, so I do recommend the highlighter tool over taking notes, but in classroom work, note taking helps them to process. The value of reading into context. Again, read and reread to determine the details of what the text says explicitly. This is going to be an important thing when we get into that social studies, those performance level descriptors in social studies. So remember what it says explicitly and to make logical inferences. Those are two skills that are going to come up here in a minute. And quite often they don't catch the nuance of something that's being stated explicitly, and they don't realize how to make those logical inferences. So you have to teach that. Notice any significant language, draw conclusions, and make generalizations from synthesizing the information in the text or the illustrations, and then cite specific textual evidence. Again, we need that evidence that supports the conclusions drawn from the text. So you have to teach those skills. It doesn't come naturally to them. A way to do that too is to teach before, during, and after reading strategies. So before reading strategies, look at the title, review headings and subheadings, identify the structure of that article or piece of work, and then activate prior knowledge. Have them think about what do they already know about the subject, and start having them start bringing their own perspective and thoughts into this article, and then determine the purpose. That's going to be really important. So during reading strategies are asking questions as they're reading, making connections based on what they already know. You know, an acorn plus sun gives you a tree. So start putting those pieces together. I already know this piece and I'm reading this. So, maybe this is the outcome of this article. And start just helping them to learn to think. That's the biggest thing I always say about the GED test, is that it's critical thinking skills. And it's our students come to us with a plethora of experiences in the world. They have critical thinking skills. They've had to figure out things that nobody else has to figure out because life has been hard, right? And so have them connect the fact that they know how to problem solve and to think about things critically. And that's going to be 9/10 of the work that you need to do on the GED, is teaching them that they have that ability to think and be creative and put two and two together. Even if it's not all there, they can rationalize it out. So the other during reading strategies is using context to identify unfamiliar words, and reread and make notes, and using signal words. And what I mean by signal words are these types of words. And so when you see these signal words, you realize that's telling you, oh, and so you can't take those pieces of information in isolation. Or similarly, but is another one, it's like there's a contrast there. So those are all keys to deciphering what this information is being presented here. So teach those signal words and how to work through those. After reading strategies, help them learn to summarize, ask clarifying questions, evaluate what has been read, and discuss in groups what was read. People will learn well from others' input and what conclusions they've drawn. It will help them to say, oh, well, I was kind of thinking that, but I wasn't sure. So it helps them to gain the confidence to question things and draw their conclusions. Common mistakes that students make when they're reading is not reading the entire text, not seeing the building blocks of the author's argument, and ignoring the details of the text. This is going to be really important. And then not understanding the overall message of the text. So sometimes our readers are struggling with reading and they're not getting that overall picture. So that's again why you read one time to get the overall picture and then start digging down into the details. So common mistakes that students make when answering questions based on reading is choosing an answer that sounds true, that is plausible, but it contradicts the views or overall message of this text. And then choosing an incorrect option that is an opinion, but is not this author's opinion, or is not supported based on the author's claim and line of reasoning. And word matching. They see a word in there and they say, oh, I saw that word, so this must be the answer. And so not thinking it through whether it's actually the right answer. Some other things that you need to look at in that close reading perspective is the elements that shape the text, which would be purpose, audience, and tone. What is the author trying to communicate? How will the audience receive that message? And then what will the audience feel and how will they respond to what they've read? So the author's purpose are varied. So here are some ideas of what the author's purpose may be: to persuade, challenge, argue, inform, connect, and entertain. So keep those in mind when you're reading something and ask them to determine what was the author's purpose. So here's a couple for you guys. An article emphasizes the importance of using more sustainable materials and less plastic in order to protect the environment. What is the author's purpose? Is it to persuade, challenge, argue, inform, connect, or entertain? Well, it's probably not entertainment. Could be several of those, really. And so talk about those with your students and say, why do you think it's persuade? They're trying to get me to do something. They're persuading me, or they're challenging me. Depends on the article. Could be an argument. Could be just information. Could be a connection if you're trying to get people of like mind to work on this together. Okay. So a speech by a candidate running for U.S. Senate focuses on the need for volunteers and more donations to help him win the upcoming election. So again, ask them, what is the author's purpose here? You just read a book about a young boy with superpowers. What is the purpose? So that one's a good one for entertain. Strategy to teach purpose. Here's an idea: is one topic, three purposes. Give students a photograph and then have them write how they would persuade, based on this picture, how would you persuade someone about this information? How would you inform them about that information? And how would you entertain them about that information? Or pick any of those purposes and do that. And again, you can pull that into social studies. So reading strategies use tone words. So these tones is important to pick out and understand. So practicing identifying a tone. If the statement was, it may look sad and shabby, but it was my first real home and has a special place in my heart. So that's sentimental, right? If I had a better job, I could move out of this dump. What does that convey? And that, you know, you can go on with looking at the others, but help them to see it's the same apartment, different tones express different tone or information of how you're going to accept that information as a reader and what they're trying to convey. So some differences between close readers and not so close readers. Close readers reread. The not so close read the text only once. Close focus on the text, and not so close let their thinking wander. Close readers ask questions, not so close take the text at face value. So this is a big one right here, is many of our students don't read knowing that they can question what is being said. It's like, really, you know, I'm not sure if I'm believing this, or where's the evidence? I don't see evidence. So I think this is just an opinion. Ask those questions. Don't just read it and say, okay, that must be so. Pay attention to language, and then not so close, ignore the syntax clues. Then close readers uncover deeper meaning, and not so close understand only at a surface level. So we've really got to get these students to dig in deeper on their reading skills and discover that deeper meaning, pay attention to the language, ask questions, focus on the text, and then, you know, reread until they really get those nuggets out. Biggest tip I got for you is to don't teach social studies in isolation. We rarely did social studies lessons. We brought social studies to our other work. And so that's why I started with the close reading. You can teach close reading and the RLA skills, inference, identifying explicit claims, and so on. You saw all those keywords that are in RLA. So bring in historical texts and things about the Constitution, things about voting rights. Use that as your articles to start these conversations and these lessons in your RLA. Then by the time they're ready to take the social studies test, it's like, oh, I've already actually learned about the Constitution and things like that. So, and surprisingly enough, math and science indicators can also translate into social studies. I highly encourage you to review the high impact indicators and weave all of that into your social studies skills with their partner subject. I've got these high impact indicators here. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I want to show them to you, and the link is there for you to go find those and really download those and get well versed with those, because it's really going to help you teach in a more global way that you should be teaching all 4 subjects kind of simultaneously, so that they're not having to do one thing then the next. It all goes together. And if you use the right information in the classroom, then you're teaching 2 things at once. We all know that we don't have them long enough to, we really need to do that, teaching 2 things at once. So here's a good example of one. So in social studies, they have to identify chronological structure of a historical narrative, analyze in detail how events and processes and ideas develop and interact with a written document, analyze cause and effect, compare differing sets of ideas. And in RLA, they're ordering sequences of events and texts. So you're doing the same work here. So use passages that are going to be social studies related while you're teaching RLA. And this would be an example of a drag and drop type question. You would have the answers here and you would be dragging and dropping here. So again, I just want to point out, you can see all these different areas. Here's how math correlates into social studies and how you can teach those two things at the same time. When you're looking at graphs and information to teach these things in math, you use social studies related items to do that with. There's science, is how they're pulling science. It's analyzing and translating quantitative information. And that's just, you use social studies type information to do that with. So the big question is where do you get those texts to be able to teach that in RLA? And I've got several different resources here for you. So Newsela, if you're not using that, is a great one, or these historical pieces. ReadWorks, and again, you guys are going to get this presentation, so you'll get all these are clickable links. But I just want to give you examples of what all is out there. Awesome Stories, another place to get text that's going to help on the social studies test. So now let's look at the gaps that are present in the test for test takers in social studies. The assessment team has identified these 5 gaps. Excuse me, I'm going to have to take a drink. And you're going to quickly see why I started with close reading as we go through these gaps. Excuse me. So gap 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We're just going to go through those real quick. So gap 1, identifying evidence to support inferences. So these words, cite or identify specific evidence to support inferences and analysis of primary and secondary sources, attending to the precise details of explanations or descriptions of a process, event, or concept. How would you be able to do that? You have to read. You have to understand what you've read. So again, the gap, number 1, reading comprehension. There's also a skill deficit in identifying evidence that supports inferences and a skill deficit in attending to precise details. All that is close reading. It's solved by close reading. So teaching close reading first helps them be able to do this. Here's an example. I'll go ahead and let you guys read it for a second, and then we'll talk about it. Excuse me. So this is getting at precise details of the source. So the first one does not mention immigration. So it says, based on the excerpt, which statement describes a way population changed from 2000 to 2010? And this one does not mention immigration. The text does not mention immigration. So the second one, there's nothing about new urban population. So we know that's not correct. And then the third one is correct. The last sentence here says that grew a modest amount from 2000 to 2010. And even though it's got this continuation here of that it declined as a percentage of the national population, that could throw you off. But that was the answer, is that this is the only one that was actually mentioned in the text, because D can be a misunderstanding and is often picked, but the actual article does not say anything about the number of rural communities. And so again, it all goes back to that close reading and taking time to read it and reading the questions and then rereading the passage and trying to decipher that. So a strategy is to introduce the concept of inference by providing simple and real life scenarios. So a scenario of a woman is standing on a podium, smiling, holding a medal. Ask your students, what is going on? How do you know? Identify specific words and phrases that give you hints about what is happening. So this is an easy one, right? They can all visualize a woman standing on a podium holding a medal and infer what could be going on, that she's won some kind of contest. You know, maybe it's an Olympics or things like that, that what are those key phrases and words that gave you those hints? She's on a podium. We always see the podiums in the Olympics. She's smiling, so she's happy about it. And she's holding a medal, which means that she's won or come in for second or third if she's got a medal. So they know how to infer that just by reading that first sentence or that one sentence, they got a picture in their mind about what was going on. So they're inferring. They just don't know that that inferring is what they're just guessing what's going on. And they just don't know those words sometimes. So they don't think they know how to infer, but they infer all the time, right? They always jump to conclusions about things. So they know how to do it. So here's a way of working this type of strategy in, which is using pictures and advertisements, comics, one word sentences or one sentences, short paragraphs, then longer and more intricate passages, and then longer, more intricate passages on nonfiction. So just move them gradually, start where they're at. And if they're not reading well, teaching inferences is hard. If you were to jump into a hard passage of nonfiction, so start with doing these smaller inferences and just teaching that skill. So here's another example. Oh, that was the same one, wasn't it? So identifying evidence to support inferences. Did I duplicate? Huh. I just like totally duplicated some of my stuff, didn't I? Wow, what have I done? Somewhere I got, oh my goodness, what is going on? Oh, I'm going the wrong way. That's
I was going to say, when I reviewed it, I didn't see duplicates.
I didn't either. It's like, I've been through it several times. It's like, it helps if you do the mouse button the right way. Okay. So how do effective readers make inferences? They use the word and text clues, picture clues, define unknown words, look for emotion or the feelings behind what's being written, use what they already know, and look for explanation for events and ask themselves questions. So here's an idea of using a picture and have them say, what do you observe in this picture? What does it remind you of? What is the photographer's purpose? what inferences can you make based on what you see in this picture? So you can all look at this picture and start drawing some conclusions, even if you didn't have the caption here. You could tell that this is a family that is not doing well. They look tired and hungry, and they have no shelter, probably don't have food, all of those things. So help them to just take time to think about the scenario of what's going on. You could use something like this as a starter for helping them write. We always had them do journaling every day. And so if they're at the level of a picture, have them look at the picture and write the story about what's going on here. That will help them make those inferences. Another strategy is it says, I say, and so activating background knowledge. So read the question, find the information in the text to help answer the question, or paraphrase or quote answers from text. Consider what you know about that information and put it together from the text with what you know, and then answer the question. And this is a lot of times it's hard for them to get all the way to the end of this, but this is a really nice example here. So why are forest fires on the increase in Black Hills of South Dakota? They're likely to say, I have no idea. I don't know anything about the Black Hills of South Dakota. I don't know. And so it says for the last several years, precipitation amounts, snowfall has decreased. So there's their piece of information that they can start thinking in their mind, okay, so it says that there's less snowfall. Less snowfall could mean that the conditions are dry throughout the Black Hills. So logically, dry conditions result from a decrease in precipitation may lead to conditions that might make fires more likely to occur. They can make those leaps. So start little on something like that, and then just keep working up into more complex ideas. So gap 2 is sequence of events, identifying the chronological structure of a historical narrative. Boy, I'm starting to, I can't talk. And the sequence of steps in a process. So the gap, guess what? Reading comprehension. So again, why I started with the close reading, it's all hinging on this reading piece. Skill deficit in identifying the chronological order of events presented in a passage, and a skill deficit in social studies content knowledge. So how do we work on that? Here's an example. Go ahead and read that one, and we'll talk through it in just a second. So which event described in the passage happened first? The Exxon Valdez ran aground on a reef. That's what the first passage talks about, or the first paragraph talks about. Was that the first thing that happened? The Exxon Valdez was taken off autopilot. Captain Hazelwood retired to his rooms for the night, and Captain Hazelwood disembarked to conduct business. So if you've read the whole thing, in chronological order, he disembarked to conduct business first. The students tend to say, oh, well, the first thing that happened is this that I read in the first paragraph. And so that's the mistake that usually is made there on this type of question. But when they realize that in time, he did this, he disembarked earlier in the day. And so chronologically, what happened first was he disembarked to conduct business. So a strategy is when reading primary and secondary sources, students need to be able to order significant events on timelines, understand the connection between and among people, places, and events, and identify cause and effect, both simple and complex. And all of these require students to develop and use sequencing skills. So just understanding the true sequence of that versus what came first in the actual article. Comparing, so gap 3 is comparing different ideas. Comparing different sets of ideas related to political, historical, and economic, geographic, or societal contexts. Evaluate the assumptions and implications inherent in differing positions. Look, the gap, reading comprehension. So I hope that it's making sense why I started with close reading. And then the skill deficit in making comparisons, logical assumptions, and rational inference is also a skill that we need to work on. But how can you do that if you're not comprehending what you're reading, right? So another example, and I won't make you read through these, but you would have them read the editorial, read the veto letter. And here's where a strategy that I always used, and I'm just going to tell you a little bit about myself, is that I'm mildly dyslexic. And I didn't know that until I was an adult, actually. And I was working on a research study for reading disabilities. And I'm like, huh, that's me. So it was like dyslexia wasn't a thing when I was a kid, right? And I'm sure it was a thing, obviously, but we didn't know about it. And so I just knew I wasn't a good reader. But these were things that I learned for myself, and I thought I was cheating, but I would always read the question first. So I highly recommend that as a skill. So you come down here and say, which idea is only behind the editorial? And so it's like, okay, I have to figure out which thing is going to be only in that article. But I have to read both of them to be able to know that. But if I know going into my reading what I'm looking for, then I'm going to be able to pick it out. So I would read the editorial, and then I would read the veto letter. If you've got a notepad, and in the test, they will have that. They can have that scratch paper there or the whiteboard, and they can write down and teach them how to. I'm going to have some graphic organizers here. Teach them how to take those notes and write down what's different about them and pull that apart. But you can say public approval of law matters. And then minority voter turnout is affected. Elections is part of democratic process. Expert opinions on voter ID laws should be considered. And let's see, read the question. So you have to read both pieces to figure out that answer. Gap 3 strategies, moving from faulty to logical assumptions. So critical questions. What am I taking for granted? What am I assuming, or am I assuming something I shouldn't? How can I determine whether this assumption is accurate? What is the author assuming? And how can I determine if the author's assumptions are accurate? An example is Christie's researching researching representations of gender in popular music. She decides to search Google and within a few minutes locates more sources than she could possibly incorporate into her final paper. Christie's inference or conclusion is, I can just use Google for my research. So that's a faulty assumption, right? But our students don't know that. They are like, yeah, that's sounds perfect. So we've got to move them from making those quick assumptions and digging deeper and moving into why is that a faulty assumption and learning how to make more logical assumptions. So discrepancy between sources is gap 4, which is compare treatments of the same social studies topic in various primary and secondary sources, noting discrepancies between and among the sources. Again, reading comprehension is the first gap. Skill deficit in contrasting and comparing sources. What's that look like? So this is 2 pieces again. They're going to have to, how did the blog entry and the letter differ? So you have to contrast these in their analysis of presidential democracy. So as you read one and read the other, you have to define where the answer is that is different. So on this one, it's D. The letter is the only one that doesn't strongly, or the letter doesn't strongly defend presidential power. So that would be the difference. And this one is harder for them to figure out what's different, than what is the same. So just keep that in mind. So here's some of these graphic organizers that can help on those 2. What is different in the contrast, same. And then on the other hand, so the 2 different articles, what are different, and then what's the same, that would pull that out. Compare and contrast graphic organizer, put in the differences, the similarities from text 1 and 2. Content knowledge. So here's where we got the very first time that there's a gap that's not going to say reading. So we do have to teach these items, civics and government and economics, because there is a gap in understanding on these pieces of information. So again, though, pull these into whatever else you're teaching and help them just continually increase their knowledge about these topics. So then when they're ready for social studies, they've got it. Here's again the assessment guide and how it looks at civics and government. These are the main ones that the assessment team has pulled out as those gaps. And then in economics, these are the main ones that the assessment team has identified. So as we look through here, strategies, access online resources. And there's several resources that I've got for you on ideas of text that you can use to help teach these items. Docs Teach. These are Creative Commons, so you can use these, no problem. And then this is Civic Online Reasoning. It's Stanford University. You have to register, but there's no charge for that. This is Reading Like a Historian. So great history lessons there to use to increase reading. Civic Online Reasoning and Beyond the Bubble history assessments. This one is The Difference Between. So when you get into this site, you then type the difference, it'll have a search and you will say Constitution versus Bill of Rights. And on that page is this chart here. You've got articles there, talks in detail about the differences between the two, and definitely teach this information. So as you teach this information, you've got the articles. And so Article 1 is about the Congress, 2 is president, 3 is courts, 4 is the states. What does that look like? They can coin money, establish the budget, regulate commerce, those types of things. The president, these are the things that are his responsibilities. The courts, the states. So things like this to help teach them those and keep those in their mind. And then Articles 5, 6, and 7 are these items. Teach about bills and how a bill becomes a law. Here's a graphic of that. I don't know if any of you remember the Schoolhouse Rock, I'm Just a Bill. It was a children's video, but man, it sure is good. So I actually used it in the classroom because it's catchy and it sticks in their mind, and it just explains it very simplistically, but you get the idea. So these are items that you could use, the different amendments here. There's 5 in Amendment 1, that kind of thing. And then these would be a synopsis of what those are. And then here's a resource, constitutionfacts.com. This is what this website looks like. This lower piece, I just blew it up so you can see what's available. You can get copies of the Constitution. They're free. You just have to pay shipping and handling. There's interactive quizzes. There's crossword puzzles, test your knowledge, treasure hunts, word finds. All of that helps them just get familiar with terms and concepts and the differences between, the Constitution and their Bill of Rights and things like that. Constitutioncenter.org. And so information about the Constitution and items that you can use to teach those strategy or information. So general strategies, we're going to go ahead and wrap up here. Share the GED indicators, review the foundational concepts, remind students to carefully read the questions and excerpts. I just really cannot emphasize that enough. Encourage them to study key definitions and terms. Encourage students to read more. Strong reading skills will benefit students in all 4 subject areas of the test. And encourage students to analyze the content that they read on a daily basis. Again, I can't emphasize that skill enough, that it's not enough to read it. They have to really question it and break it down and say, what is this saying? And why is it saying it? And do I believe it? And, just all those things. Don't just accept what you're reading. Strong critical thinking skills will benefit students in all 4 subject areas. So armed for reading and answering questions carefully, analyze questions, read the text, make notes and highlight clues, eliminate choices, and double check every answer. So again, here's the resources. These are going to be clickable links for you. These are on our website at GED, but these are all out there on the web. And with that, I will open it up for questions. And I'm going to go ahead and put that up to make sure you have Lisa's information. You're welcome to reach out to me as well, but Lisa's your state relationship manager, and she can reach out to me if need be. So what questions do you all have? there anything I need to go back over?
It's going to point out that Jamie uses Schoolhouse Rock in her U.S. government class too. I've talked to a lot
I
of people who
love
do.
it.
I
I
know.
do. Because then you just keep singing it, and it's like, oh, okay. It's such a cute little ditty. I love it.
To reinvent that wheel. It's been done and
Right,
it's good.
right. It is good. It is good.
You can, if you have any questions, you can come off mute. I just want to thank Liz for coming in and doing this and putting this deck together and all those resources that are in there.
That
That's
was
awesome.
always, yeah, that was always what I begged for, was give me resources.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I just don't even know where to start. And so if you've got a page of clickable links, that should get you started.
Awesome.
Got a quiet bunch.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for coming, everyone. And we'll have another session in a couple weeks. I don't have my calendar in front of me to tell me which one it is. But this has been going on every couple weeks now for a little while, and it will continue going. So you can look
Awesome.
at the schedule that they've posted and see which ones are
I can
relevant.
tell
to
you. So
Yeah.
our next one's going to be November 18th, and we'll be looking at the reasoning through language arts test.
Well, there you go. And use social studies texts when you do your language arts.
And we'll have a Dora Beard here for that one if all goes
Oh,
as
that's awesome.
planned. And so we're fortunate to have all these GED experts come and help us out here. So
That's awesome.
thank you very much for coming, everyone. And thank you, Liz. And thank you, Danielle, for hosting.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Bye.